They say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. But what happens when indifference gets a billion-dollar makeover? Darius thought he had won. He traded his boring wife, Callista, for a mistress he swore looked like a movie star. He spent months dragging Callista's name through the mud, painting her as a woman who had let herself go. He thought he was the main character of their lives until the night of the Metropole Gala. He was ready to brag. He was ready to shine. But he wasn't ready for the moment the cameras turned away from him, to capture the woman he threw away, standing on the arm of a man who could buy and sell Darius's entire existence. This is the story of the Gilded Revenge. Buckle up! The ink on the divorce papers had been dry for 11 months, but for Darius Vance, the victory lap was still ongoing. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master bedroom of his penthouse, adjusting the onyx cufflinks on his bespoke tuxedo. The reflection pleased him. At 42, he had maintained the jawline of a man in his 30s, thanks to a strict regimen of kale, expensive moisturizers, and the rejuvenating energy of a 24-year-old girlfriend. Darius, do you think the emeralds or the diamonds? He turned. Sienna was posed in the doorway, wearing a dress that cost more than his first car. It was red, aggressively, violently red. It clung to her curves with the desperation of a drowning swimmer. She was beautiful, objectively. Blonde hair styled in old Hollywood waves, lips painted a shade that promised trouble. She looked, as Darius had told his partners at the firm just yesterday, like a movie star. The diamonds, Darius said, his voice smooth, authoritative. The emeralds clash with your eyes. We want perfection tonight, Sienna. All eyes will be on us. Sienna beamed, a little vacantly, and scampered off to change. Darius turned back to the mirror. He adjusted his tie. He felt a profound sense of validation. Leaving Callista had been a business decision as much as a romantic one. Callista was comfortable. She was sensible shoes and muted tones. She was discussions about mortgage rates and sustainable gardening. She was beige. Darius was a man of technicolor. He needed a partner who reflected his rising status in the city's architectural scene. He needed someone who looked good in a photo spread. Callista, with her messy buns, paint-stained fingers, and quiet intellectualism, had become a liability. He remembered the day he left. He hadn't been cruel in his mind, just honest. "I've outgrown this, Cal," he had said, standing in the kitchen they had renovated together. "I've outgrown us. You're happy staying in the background. I'm meant for the spotlight. It's unfair to drag you where you don't belong." She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown plates. She had just looked at him with those intelligent hazel eyes, eyes he used to love but had grown to find unsettlingly perceptive, and nodded. "If the spotlight is what you need, Darius, I hope it keeps you warm." That was it, no fight, just surrender. It proved his point. She lacked fire. She lacked ambition. "Ready, darling." Sienna reappeared, dripping in diamonds. She looked like a trophy. His trophy. "Perfect," Darius said, offering her his arm. "Tonight, we own the city." 5 miles away, in a converted loft in the Arts District, Callista woke up to the sound of rain against the skylight. She didn't move immediately. She lay in the center of the massive bed, staring at the exposed beams of the ceiling. The silence of the apartment was no longer heavy. It was spacious. For the first 6 months after Darius left, the silence had felt like a physical weight, pressing the air out of her lungs. She had spent nights analyzing every conversation, every meal, wondering when she had become boring. She was an art conservator. Her job was to take broken, dirty, forgotten things and reveal their original brilliance. She worked with microscopes and solvents, patience and silence. Darius had called it watching paint dry. She called it saving history. She sat up and walked to the kitchen, her bare feet cool against the polished concrete. On the granite island sat a thick envelope made of heavy cream cardstock. The logo was embossed in gold leaf. The Metropole Foundation Gala. It was the biggest night of the year for the city's elite. Architects, developers, celebrities, and politicians. Darius would be there. It was his Super Bowl. He had been talking about securing an invitation for 3 years. Callista had received hers 3 weeks ago, not as a +1, not as a spouse, but as herself. Callista Vance, restoring her maiden name Halloway, was pending legally, but the invitation addressed her as Callista Halloway. She picked up the card. Her hand didn't tremble. "Are you going to stare at it, or are you going to get dressed?" The voice came from the living area. Julian Thorne was sitting on her vintage velvet sofa, reading a newspaper on a tablet. He was wearing a dark gray t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits the world usually saw him in. Julian was 45, with salt and pepper hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was a billionaire tech mogul who had recently pivoted to philanthropy and art collection. He was also her client. She was currently restoring a 17th century Dutch master he had acquired at auction. "I haven't decided," Callista said, pouring coffee. "He'll be there," Julian said, not looking up. "I know. He'll have the new girl, the one from Instagram." "I know." Julian finally looked up. His gaze was intense, analytical, but devoid of the judgment Callista had lived with for a decade. "You did the work, Callista. The restoration of the Vermeer is the centerpiece of the gala's auction. You earned that seat at the head table. Are you going to let a mid-tier architect with a narcissism complex keep you in the shadows?" Callista took a sip of coffee. She thought about the beige comment. She thought about how Darius used to talk over her at dinner parties, explaining her own job to people incorrectly. She thought about the way he looked at Sienna, like an object to be polished, and the way he used to look at her, like a stain to be removed. "I don't have a dress," she lied. Julian smirked. It was a terrifying, charming expression. He stood up and gestured to the hallway, where 3 garment bags from the House of Versace were hanging on the coat rack. He had had them delivered an hour ago. "I took the liberty," Julian said. "Think of it as a bonus for the Vermeer job, or think of it as tactical warfare. Either way, pick one. The car's here in 3 hours." Callista looked at the bags. She looked at Julian, a man who intimidated prime ministers, but waited patiently for her to finish her coffee. "Why are you doing this, Julian?" "Because," he said, walking over and leaning against the island, "I hate bad architecture. And your ex-husband is a structurally unsound human being. Also," his voice softened, just a fraction, "I want to see what happens when the masterpiece is finally unveiled." The process of becoming beautiful, Callista realized, was remarkably similar to restoring a painting. You had to strip away the accumulated grime of the years, the self-doubt, the harsh words that had stuck like varnish, the posture of apology she had adopted to make herself smaller for Darius. She sat in front of her vanity. The makeup artist Julian had sent was a miracle worker, but she wasn't painting a mask on Callista. She was highlighting things Callista had forgotten she possessed. The sharp arch of her cheekbones, the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, the fullness of her lips, which Darius had once criticized as pouty when she was unhappy. "You have a face for tragedy, honey," the makeup artist murmured, blending a smoky gold shadow. "But tonight, we're giving them triumph." When Callista finally stepped into the dress, the room seemed to inhale. It wasn't just a dress. It was a weapon sheathed in liquid gold silk. It was a custom Versace, vintage 1999, structured with a cowl neck that draped dangerously low in the back. It skimmed her body like a second skin, unforgiving and glorious. It demanded posture. It demanded confidence. You couldn't slouch in a dress like this. You had to glide. She walked out into the living room. Julian was waiting. He had changed into a tuxedo that fit him with military precision. He was on the phone, speaking in low, rapid French. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. He slowly lowered the phone. He didn't smile. He didn't whistle. He just stared, his eyes tracking the line of the gold silk from her shoulder to the floor. "Well," Julian said, his voice rougher than usual. "That'll do." "Is it too much?" Callista asked, her hand fluttering nervously to her neck. "I feel exposed." "You were invisible for 10 years, Callista," Julian said, walking toward her. He stopped a foot away. The scent of sandalwood and expensive scotch clung to him. Exposure is the point. You aren't just attending this gala. You are the gala. The Vermeer is the art, but you're the revelation. He held out a box. Inside was a necklace. It wasn't subtle. A string of yellow diamonds that looked like captured sunlight. "Julian, I can't. This is too much." "It's a loan," he said, taking it out and moving behind her. His fingers grazed the bare skin of her neck, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with adrenaline. "It belongs to the estate. It needs to be worn to keep the brilliance. Gems lose their luster if they're kept in the dark too long. People are much the same." He clasped it. The cold stone settled against her warm skin. She looked in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the wife who apologized for burning the toast. She wasn't the woman who cried in the shower so her husband wouldn't hear. She was a queen, a golden, terrifying queen. "Are you ready?" Julian asked, offering his arm. Callista took a deep breath. She thought of Darius. She thought of the pity in their friend's eyes when the divorce news broke. Poor Callista. She just couldn't keep up. "No," Callista said, a small, sharp smile cutting across her face. "But I think they aren't ready for me." In the limousine, the silence was comfortable. Julian didn't try to fill the air with nervous chatter. He worked on his tablet, occasionally glancing at her with an unreadable expression. "What happens if he talks to me?" Callista asked, breaking the silence as they neared the venue. The lights of the metropole were visible in the distance, beams of white cutting through the night sky. "He will," Julian said. "He won't be able to help himself. Narcissists are drawn to the brightest light in the room, even if it burns them." "And what do I say?" Julian turned to her, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. "You say nothing. You let him talk. You let him dig his own grave. And when he realizes that you are standing on a pedestal he can't reach, you smile. That's it. Just smile. And you? What is your role in this performance?" Julian reached out and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, calloused. "I'm the velvet rope, Callista. No one gets to the masterpiece without getting past me." The red carpet at the Metropole Gala was a sensory assault. 100 photographers screamed names, flashbulbs popped like strobes in a nightmare, and the air smelled of ozone, perfume, and desperation. Darius Vance was in his element. He guided Sienna toward the press line, his hand firmly on the small of her back. He wasn't just guiding her, he was presenting her. "Look," his posture screamed. "Look at what I acquired." Sienna was loving it. She posed, hand on hip, lips parted, just as she had practiced in the mirror. "Darius! Darius over here! Who are you wearing?" a reporter from City Style shouted. Darius stepped forward, blocking Sienna slightly. "I'm in Ford Custom, and this," he gestured to Sienna, "is Sienna. She's wearing... well, she makes the dress, doesn't she?" He laughed at his own charm. He felt invincible. He looked around the carpet. He saw his rivals, Johnston from the austere minimalist firm, trembling in a dull gray suit. He saw the mayor. He saw the city's elite, And he knew with absolute certainty that he was the best-looking man there. "You look amazing, baby," he whispered to Sienna. "My feet hurt," she whispered back, her smile frozen. "And I need a drink. This is taking forever." "Patience," Darius hissed through his teeth. "We have to do the main press line. Entertainment tonight is at the end." He continued down the line, dropping sound bites. He bragged about his new skyscraper project, which was currently stalled in zoning, but they didn't need to know that. He bragged about Sienna's modeling career. She had done 2 catalog shoots. He bragged about how happy he was. "Life is about evolution," he told a reporter with a microphone. "You have to shed the old to make way for the new. I've never been happier. I feel like I finally arrived." And then the atmosphere changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a silence. A ripple of quiet that started at the drop-off point and rolled down the red carpet like a tsunami wave. The photographers near the entrance stopped shouting. They lowered their cameras, then raised them again with frantic intensity. "Who is that?" Sienna asked, standing on her tiptoes. Darius turned, annoyed that the attention had shifted. "Probably some Hollywood starlet. Ignore it. Keep looking at camera 3. But the silence was growing louder. A murmur began to rise. "Is that? No, it can't be." A black Maybach had pulled up. The driver opened the rear door. First, a leg emerged, long, toned, capped in a gold stiletto that looked sharp enough to kill. Then the woman rose. Darius squinted. The lights were bright, and the figure was coated in gold. The dress shimmered like liquid metal under the flashbulbs. She had the bearing of royalty. Her hair was swept up in an intricate modern style that exposed a neck draped in diamonds that Darius knew instantly cost more than his entire firm. A man stepped out behind her. Julian Thorne. The Julian Thorne. The elusive billionaire who never attended these events. He placed a possessive, protective hand on the woman's lower back. The photographers went feral. The screaming started again, but it was different. It was hungrier. "Julian! Mr. Thorne! Over here!" And then, a photographer from the Times, a man Darius knew, shouted the name. "Callista! Callista, look here!" Darius froze. His brain refused to process the visual data. He knew Callista. Callista was cardigans. Callista was paint smocks. Callista was beige. The woman on the red carpet turned. She looked directly at the cameras. She wasn't smiling a polite, apologetic smile. She was smiling with a terrifying, serene confidence. It was her. It was Callista. But it wasn't his Callista. This woman was a stranger. A glowing, golden, breathtaking stranger. "Is that your ex-wife?" Sienna asked, her voice shrill. "Why is she wearing Versace? And why is she with Julian Thorne?" Darius couldn't speak. He felt like he had been punched in the gut. He watched as Julian leaned in and whispered something to Callista, making her laugh. A genuine, throaty laugh that Darius hadn't heard in years. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked like a movie star. And Sienna, standing next to him in her loud red dress and store-bought diamonds, suddenly looked very, very young and very, very cheap. The press line began to shift. The reporters who had been interviewing Darius were now looking over his shoulder, their eyes glazed over, already moving on. They didn't care about the architect and his mistress anymore. The narrative had shifted. The queen had arrived, and the jester was left standing in the cold. Callista and Julian began to walk down the carpet. They were moving toward him. There was nowhere to hide. "Darius," Sienna tugged his arm. "Let's go inside. My feet hurt." "Quiet," Darius snapped, unable to tear his eyes away. Callista was 20 feet away, then 10, then 5. She didn't stop. She didn't flinch. As she passed him, her eyes flicked to his. There was no anger. There was no sadness. There was just a cool, polite recognition, the way one acknowledges a waiter or a doorman. "Hello, Darius," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, distinct. "Callista," he choked out. You look—" She didn't wait for him to finish. She turned her gaze to Sienna, offering a small, pitying smile, before turning back to Julian. "Shall we?" she asked the billionaire. "After you," Julian said. They swept past him, a wake of expensive perfume and raw power trailing behind them. Darius was left standing in the middle of the red carpet, the flashbulbs popping blindly behind him, capturing the exact moment his heart broke. Not from love, but from the devastating realization that he had thrown away a diamond to pick up a piece of colored glass. "She looks better than me," Sienna whispered, horrifyingly honest. Darius didn't answer. He was too busy watching his past walk away with his future. The grand ballroom of the Metropole was a cavern of crystal and velvet, designed to make people feel simultaneously important and insignificant. The chandeliers were the size of small cars, dripping with Austrian crystal, casting a fractured, dazzling light over the 300 guests. Darius Vance adjusted his tuxedo jacket as the usher guided them toward their table. He held his head high, a tight smile plastered on his face. He was scanning the room, calculating. The layout of the Metropole Gala was a geography of power. The closer you were to the stage, the more you mattered. "Right this way, Mr. Vance," the usher said, stopping at a table near the back, nestled uncomfortably close to the kitchen doors. Table 12. Darius stared at the number card in the center of the floral arrangement. Table 12 was respectable. It wasn't the shame tables in the far corners, reserved for junior associates and charity cases, but it certainly wasn't the inner circle. "Is this right?" Darius snapped, keeping his voice low, but letting the irritation bleed through. "I was told we would be near the front. My firm is a silver-tier donor." "I apologize, sir," the usher said, his face a mask of professional indifference. "The seating chart was finalized this morning by the committee chair." Darius sat down, seething. He pulled out his chair for Sienna, who was busy trying to take a selfie that captured the chandeliers without getting her double chin. "The lighting is terrible back here," Sienna complained, tapping furiously at her screen. "And who are these people?" Darius looked around the table. A retired dentist, a city council member who had been indicted twice, and the owner of a chain of car washes. He felt a vein in his temple throb. Then he looked at the front of the room. Table 1, the head table. It was situated directly in front of the stage, bathed in a soft golden spotlight. There were only 6 seats. The mayor, the governor, the director of the Metropole Museum. And there, sitting with her back straight and her golden dress pooling around her chair like liquid wealth, was Callista. Julian Thorne sat beside her. He wasn't looking at the stage. He had his body angled toward Callista, listening intently to whatever she was saying. He poured her water. He laughed at something she whispered. It was an intimacy that was deafening in its quietness. "Why is she up there?" Sienna asked, following his gaze. She stabbed a piece of bread with her butter knife. "She restores old paintings. She's basically a janitor for art." "Shut up, Sienna," Darius hissed. "Don't talk to me like that," Sienna snapped, her voice rising. "I'm the hottest girl at this table. You should be happy." Darius ignored her. He poured himself a glass of wine, draining half of it in one gulp. He needed to reassert control. He needed to remind everyone, remind Callista, that he was the one who had made the decisions. He was the one who had left. "I'm going to say hello," Darius said, standing up. "Darius, don't," Sienna warned, grabbing his sleeve. "You're going to look desperate." "I'm just being polite, Sienna. It's called civilization." He shook her off and began the long walk across the ballroom. It felt like walking across a battlefield. He nodded to people he knew, flashing the winning smile that had closed million-dollar deals. but his eyes were fixed on the golden figure at table 1. As he approached, the air seemed to get thinner, rarer. The chatter at table 1 died down as his shadow fell across the white tablecloth. Callista looked up. Up close, she was even more devastating. The candlelight caught the facets of the yellow diamonds at her throat. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were clear, utterly, terrifyingly clear. There was no redness from crying, no shadow of the heartbreak he had assumed she was drowning in. "Darius," she said. Her tone was pleasant, the way one greets a distant cousin at a funeral. "Callista," he said, forcing a warmth he didn't feel. "You look different." "I suppose I do." He turned his gaze to Julian. "Thorn, nice to see you. Didn't know you were bringing my ex-wife." "I didn't bring her, Vance," Julian said, not bothering to stand. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his eyes cold and predatory. "Callista is the guest of honor. I'm merely the escort." "Guest of honor?" Darius laughed, a short, sharp sound. "For what? Did she fix a chipped frame?" The table went silent. The mayor looked down at his soup. Callista didn't flinch. She picked up her wine glass, inspecting the rim. "Actually, Darius, I led the restoration of the Vermeer that is being unveiled tonight, the one Julian discovered. The foundation felt that saving a $40 million masterpiece warranted a seat at the table." She paused, taking a slow sip. "Where are you sitting? I didn't see you." Darius felt the blood rush to his face. "We're back there. Table 12. "Ah," Callista said. "The acoustics are tricky back there. I hope you can hear the speeches." It was a dismissal. A polite, brutal dismissal. "We should catch up later," Darius said, his voice tight. "For old time's sake." "I don't think so," Julian interjected, his voice like grinding stones. "Callista has a full schedule tonight. And frankly, Vance, you're blocking the waiter." Darius looked around. A server with a tray of filet mignon was waiting patiently behind him. Darius was the obstruction. He was the inconvenience. He turned back to Callista, desperate for a crumb of the woman who used to rub his shoulders after a long day. "Cal, you really going to let him talk to me like that?" Callista finally looked at him with something other than indifference. It was pity. "He's not talking for me, Darius," she said softly. "He's just saying what I'm too polite to say. Go back to your table. Your girlfriend is looking for the breadbasket." Darius turned and walked away. His ears were burning. He could feel the eyes of Table 1 boring into his back. He didn't look like a conqueror returning from war. He looked like a man who had just been escorted out of a club he couldn't afford. Dinner was a blur of mediocre beef and forced conversation. Darius drank 3 more glasses of wine. By the time the lights dimmed for the auction, he was vibrating with a toxic mix of alcohol and wounded ego. He needed a win. He needed to prove that he was still a player. The auctioneer, a British man with a voice like melted chocolate, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we come now to the highlight of our evening, Lot 45, The Girl with the Lute by Johannes Vermeer. Recently authenticated and brilliantly restored by the head conservator of the Thorn collection, Ms. Callista Halloway." A spotlight hit the easel on stage. The velvet cloth was pulled away. The painting was breathtaking. The light in the oil paint seemed to glow from within. But then, a second spotlight hit Table 1, illuminating Callista. She stood up, acknowledging the applause. She looked humble, graceful, and agonizingly talented. "This is a silent charity auction for the naming rights of the new wing where the painting will be housed," the auctioneer announced. "Bidding starts at $500,000. $500,000, a paddle went up near the front. $600, called another. Darius's hand twitched. He didn't have $500,000 of disposable cash. His liquidity was tied up in the new condo and Sienna's allowance, but he felt a reckless madness taking over. $700,000! The room turned. Darius held his paddle high. He saw Callista turn in her seat. Her eyes widened slightly. See, he thought, I still matter. 800,000. Julian Thorne's voice cut through the room without a microphone. He didn't even raise his paddle. He just spoke, and the room obeyed. Darius felt a surge of hatred. 900,000, he shouted. Sienna grabbed his arm. Darius, what are you doing? We can't afford that. Quiet, he hissed. I know what I'm doing. He'll back down. He's a businessman. He won't overpay for a plaque on a wall. $1 million, Julian said, bored. 1.1, Darius screamed. The room was buzzing now. It was a cockfight. Julian turned in his chair. He looked all the way back to table 12. He locked eyes with Darius. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He put his paddle down. The auctioneer looked around. I have $1.1 million from Mr. Vance. Do I hear 1.2? No? Going once? Darius froze. Cold sweat erupted instantly on his back. If Julian stopped, Darius would have to pay. He would be bankrupt. He would lose the firm. He would lose everything. Please, he prayed to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. Please bid. Going twice. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Darius stopped breathing. The room spun. He saw his life flashing before his eyes. The bankruptcy hearings, the humiliation, the tiny apartment he'd have to rent. $2 million. The voice didn't come from Julian. It came from Callista. The room gasped. Callista was standing, her hand resting on Julian's shoulder, but she was holding the paddle. $2 million, she repeated, her voice steady. On behalf of the Thorne Trust. Sold! The auctioneer slammed the gavel down before anyone could breathe. To the Thorne Trust for $2 million. Darius slumped in his chair. He felt like he had been pulled back from the edge of a cliff, only to realize he had wet himself in fear. He looked at the front table. Julian was whispering to Callista, kissing her hand. Darius realized with a sickening jolt what had happened. Julian hadn't stopped bidding because he was done. He had stopped to let Darius dangle. He had stopped to let Darius feel the noose. And Callista had saved him, not out of love, not out of loyalty, but because she knew he couldn't pay. She had saved him out of pity. It was the ultimate emasculation. You're an idiot, Sienna whispered, picking up her clutch. I'm going to the ladies' room. Don't talk to me. She stormed off. Darius sat alone at table 12, surrounded by half-eaten dessert and the ruins of his pride. The gala was winding down. The band had switched to slower, bluesy jazz. Couples were swaying on the dance floor. Darius couldn't leave. Not yet. He felt a magnetic pull toward the terrace, where he had seen Callista slip away a few minutes ago. He needed to fix the narrative. He needed to make her understand that he wasn't the villain, that he was just complicated. He pushed open the heavy glass doors. The night air was cool and smelled of rain and jasmine. The city skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent to his suffering. Callista was leaning against the stone balustrade, looking out at the view. She was alone. The wind whipped wisps of hair around her face. She looked like a statue of a goddess who had decided to visit Earth and found it wanting. You did that on purpose, Darius said. Callista didn't turn. You'll have to be more specific, Darius. I've done a lot of things tonight. He walked up to the railing, standing beside her, but not too close. He was afraid if he got too close, the heat coming off her anger, or was it his shame, would burn him. The auction, he said. You bid to humiliate me, to show everyone that I couldn't afford it. Callista finally turned. Her face was unreadable in the shadows. I bid because Julian and I decided weeks ago that the wing should be named after the original artist, not a donor. It was always the plan. You were just collateral damage in your own ego trip." "Collateral damage?" Darius laughed bitterly. "Is that what I am to you now, after 12 years?" "Darius," she sighed, a sound of infinite fatigue. "You left me. You told me I was boring. You told me I held you back. You wanted a movie star. You wanted excitement. Well," she gestured to her dress, the diamonds, the gala behind them, "are you not entertained?" "This isn't you," Darius insisted, his voice cracking. This glitz, this billionaire boyfriend. It's a costume, Cal. You're the woman who likes tea on Sunday mornings and reading in bed. You're pretending to be this femme fatale to get back at me." Callista stepped closer. For the first time, he saw the steel beneath the silk. "You never looked, did you?" she asked softly. "You looked at me for 12 years, but you never actually saw me. I didn't change, Darius. I just stopped making myself smaller so you wouldn't feel threatened. I stopped dimming my lights so yours would seem brighter." She reached out and touched his lapel. Her touch was light, but it felt heavy. "And regarding Julian," she continued, "he doesn't need me to be a movie star. He needs me to be exactly who I am. He finds my intelligence sexy. He finds my work important. He doesn't want a trophy. He wants a partner. He's using you," Darius spat, desperate to find a flaw. "He's a shark. Once the novelty wears off, he'll dump you just like you did," Callista finished for him. Darius fell silent. "He might," Callista shrugged, "or he might not. But the difference is, if he leaves, I won't fall apart. Because I built this," she pointed to herself, "from the rubble you left behind. I cemented the cracks with gold, Darius. I'm stronger now than I ever was with you." The door to the terrace opened. Julian stepped out. He didn't look aggressive. He looked bored. "The car's ready, Callista," he said. He glanced at Darius. "Vance, your girlfriend is in the lobby. She's asking the valet if they can call her an Uber. You might want to hurry." Darius looked from Julian to Callista. He saw the united front. He saw the gap between their world and his. It wasn't just money. It was dignity. "Goodbye, Darius," Callista said, turning her back on him to look at the city one last time. Darius opened his mouth to speak, to have the last word, but he found he had none left. He turned and walked back into the warmth of the ballroom, leaving the gold and the diamonds in the dark. As he walked through the lobby, he saw Sienna sitting on a bench, her heels in her hand, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he approached. Her makeup was smudged. "You didn't win," she said flatly. "Let's just go home," Darius muttered. "No," Sienna said, standing up. She looked at him with a sudden sharp clarity that mirrored Callista's earlier gaze. "I think I'm going to take that Uber. You're not the main character, Darius. You're just the ex-husband." She walked out the spinning doors, leaving Darius standing alone under the harsh lights of the hotel lobby, while the applause from the ballroom thundered in the distance, cheering for someone else. The morning after the Metropole Gala, Darius Vance woke up to a silence that was far louder than the applause he had craved. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. He walked into the living room, nursing a migraine that throbbed in time with his heartbeat. The closet in the hallway was open. Sienna's red suitcases were gone. On the kitchen counter, where he usually found his green juice, there was only a key fob and a note written on a napkin. "I'm going to my sister's. Don't call. You're too much drama for a Monday." Darius crumpled the napkin and threw it into the sink. "Good riddance," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He told himself he didn't care. Sienna was a placeholder, a decorative object that had started talking too much. He went to his firm, expecting the sanctuary of his office to restore his equilibrium. Instead, he found chaos. "Mr. Vance," His secretary, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had survived 3 of his affairs, looked up with a pale face. "We just received a cancellation notice from the Sterling Group." Darius froze. The Sterling Group was their biggest client for the upcoming fiscal year. A 40-story mixed-use tower downtown. "What? Why? Call Johnston immediately." "I did, sir," he said. "Well, he said that after your performance at the Metropole Gala, the board feels your personal brand is too volatile for their conservative image. They're moving the contract to the Thorne Development Group." "Thorne?" Darius walked into his office and slammed the door. He sank into his leather chair, the leather creaking under the weight of his collapsing reality. It wasn't just the auction, it was the optics. In the world of high-stakes architecture, perception was structural integrity. If you looked cracked, you were condemned. He pulled up the news on his tablet. The headlines were brutal. Metropole Gala shines with Vermeer unveiling. Callista Holloway stuns in Versace. Julian Thorne and the Mystery Woman. A power couple for the arts. And then, buried in the gossip column of a second-tier blog, local architect Darius Vance, caught in bidding war he couldn't afford. He was a footnote, a cautionary tale. He needed to fix this. He needed leverage. He opened his laptop and started digging. He spent hours scrolling through old emails, bank statements, anything from his marriage to Callista. He was looking for dirt. An unpaid bill, a moment of instability, anything he could use to paint her as incompetent or at least less perfect than the golden goddess the media was crowning her. He found nothing, just years of tax returns filed on time, receipts for his dry cleaning, emails reminding him of his mother's birthday. The only thing he found was a folder titled Darius Sketches. He clicked it. It was full of scanned drawings, not his, hers, sketches of buildings, bridges, landscapes. They were brilliant, technically flawless, but possessing a warmth his cold, modernist glass boxes never achieved. He remembered now. Years ago, she had shown him a sketchbook. He had glanced at it, patted her head, and said, "Stick to fixing old paintings, sweetie. Leave the building to the architects." He stared at the screen. She hadn't just been beige. She had been holding back an ocean of talent to avoid drowning him. His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer. "Darius, we need to talk about the alimony restructuring you wanted. Given the current instability of your firm's contracts, the judge isn't going to look kindly on a request to lower payments. If anything, Callista's lawyers could argue for an increase based on your projected insolvency." Darius laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "She doesn't need my money, Tom. She has Thorne's money now. That's not how the law works, Darius. And frankly, after last night, she has the public sentiment. You're the villain in this movie. My advice? Settle. Apologize. Disappear for a while." Darius hung up. He looked out the window at the skyline he wanted to own. It looked like a set of jagged teeth, ready to chew him up. 3 days later, Callista was in her studio in the Arts District. The gala was over, the dress was back in its bag, and she was wearing her favorite oversized linen shirt and jeans. She was working on a small landscape, removing a layer of yellowed varnish with a cotton swab dipped in solvent. The doorbell rang. She checked the security monitor. It was Darius. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking disheveled in a way that was probably calculated to garner sympathy. She buzzed him in. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. He walked into the studio, looking around at the high ceilings, the smell of turpentine and linseed oil, the quiet hum of the dehumidifiers. "I didn't know you had this place," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "I bought it 6 months ago," Callista said, not looking up from her work. "With the settlement money and my own savings." Darius walked over to the easel. He watched her hands move. Steady. Precise. I saw the sketches, he said abruptly, on the old cloud drive. The bridge designs. Callista paused. She set the swab down. Those are old. They're good, Cal. Better than good. I know. He looked at her, startled by the lack of false modesty. Why didn't you ever, kid, do anything with them? Callista turned on her stool to face him. The afternoon light filtered through the skylight, illuminating the dust motes dancing between them. Because, Darius, there was only room for one genius in our house, and you needed the space more than I did. Darius flinched. Is that what you think? That I suppressed you? I think you loved the idea of me, as long as I remained a supporting character. You loved having a wife who was competent enough to manage your life, but not successful enough to challenge your ego. She said it without bitterness, just a factual recitation of history. I loved you, Darius said, his voice cracking. I did. You loved how I made you feel, Callista corrected. You loved the safety, and when you got bored of safety, you went looking for validation. That's not love, Darius. That's consumption. Darius ran a hand through his hair. I lost the Sterling contract. Sienna left. The firm is shaky. I heard. Did you do it? Did you ask Thorne to pull the plug? Callista laughed softly. She stood up and wiped her hands on a rag. Darius, look at me. Do I look like I spend my days plotting your downfall? I don't think about you enough to destroy you. Julian didn't blacklist you because of me. He blacklisted you because he saw you at the auction. He saw a man who loses control when his ego is bruised. He doesn't trust you with his money. That was your doing, not mine. The truth hit him harder than a scream. It was the ultimate insult. He wasn't worth the effort of revenge. He was just a bad investment. So what now? Darius asked, sounding like a child lost in a supermarket. We just go on. I go on, Callista said. I'm already gone, Darius. I'm miles down the road. You can stay here and be angry, or you can start rebuilding. But you have to do it alone. No audience, no applause, just the work. She walked to the door and held it open. Goodbye, Darius. He looked at her one last time. He wanted to beg. He wanted to yell. But he saw the peace in her eyes, a fortress he could no longer breach. Goodbye, Callista, he whispered. He walked out into the rain. He didn't have an umbrella. 6 months later. The gallery opening was small, intimate, and entirely devoid of paparazzi. It was held in a refurbished warehouse in the Navy Yard. The invitation simply read, Structures of Silence, New Works by C. Halloway. The room was filled with sketches, architectural drafts, and oil paintings. The theme was resilience, broken structures repaired with gold, bridges spanning foggy chasms, portraits of people looking away from the viewer, toward a light source that was out of frame. Callista stood near the entrance, holding a glass of sparkling water. She wore a simple black jumpsuit, elegant and understated. She didn't need the gold dress anymore. She didn't need the costume. Julian was there, of course. He was in the corner, arguing amiably with an art critic about the influence of brutalism on modern sculpture. He caught her eye and winked. They were together, but it wasn't a consuming, frantic fire. It was a steady warmth, a partnership of equals. He had his empire. She had her art. They met in the middle. Excuse me? Callista turned. A young woman, an architecture student by the look of her portfolio case, was standing there. Are you Callista Halloway? I am. I wanted to say that your design for the suspended garden bridge, it's incredible. It inspired my thesis. Callista smiled. It was a genuine, beaming smile. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. Across the street, sitting in a coffee shop, a man watched through the window. Darius Vance adjusted his glasses. He was working at a smaller firm now. a boutique agency that did residential renovations, kitchens, bathrooms. It was boring work. It was beige work. But it was honest. He saw Callista laugh at something the student said. He saw Julian walk over and put a hand on her shoulder, not to possess her, but to ground her. He looked down at his own sketchbook on the table. He was drawing a gazebo for a client's garden. It was simple, functional. He picked up his pen. He didn't hate her anymore. He didn't hate himself either. He just felt a quiet, dull ache of missed opportunity. He had held a diamond in his hand and complained that it was too hard. He capped his pen, took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, and turned the page. Inside the gallery, Callista turned back to the room. The air was light. The future was unwritten. She took a breath, savoring the smell of rain and success. She was no longer the restoration. She was the art, and that is the story of the Gilded Revenge. It wasn't about destroying Darius. It was about Callista rebuilding herself so completely that his opinion no longer mattered. True revenge isn't always burning the other person's house down. Sometimes it's building a castle they aren't invited to enter. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, redemption, and the sweet taste of success, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Have you ever had a glow-up moment after a breakup? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, keep writing your own story.